Welcome everyone to our first Sustainable Finance Conference organized by the new working group we founded at Swiss Youth for Climate. We aim to raise awareness among youth about sustainable finance and have an impact in this field with concrete projects and ideas you can come up with. And today, so we have the pleasure to have Vincent Kaufmann as our speaker, and I will now hand over to Raphael, who will present a bit more our speaker and the content of this conference.
Yes, thanks. Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us tonight. As Jean-Valentin said, we have the pleasure to have Mr. Vincent Kaufmann as our first guest speaker for this conference. Vincent Kaufmann is the CEO of Ethos Foundation since 2015. Previously, he started to work at Ethos in 2004 already. First as an analyst for Swiss companies, and tonight we have the chance to have him to discuss a few topics. First, we're going to start with what is sustainable finance, as it's the first conference on this topic, and then on why it matters for investors and especially institutional investors. Then we're gonna have a few words and interesting examples on the ethos approach on sustainable investment, mainly active ownership, so proxy voting and dialogue with the companies. And at the end, we're gonna finish with the Q&A, so you can don't hesitate to write your questions for the Q&A in the chat if you're shy, or you can also ask them and raise your voice at the end.
Excellent. Thank you, Raphael. Thank you, Swiss Youth for Climate, for the invitation. It's a pleasure to be able to share some minutes with you and share our view and experience on sustainable finance. We have the chance actually to have Raphael as one of our employees for a couple of months, and I really hope you have all the same conviction as he has, because that gives us a lot of hope that yeah, we can change also the way we behave. And I think that's key in our work at Ethos, try to behave companies. I would say to tackle some of the environmental and social issues we face today. And I think there is not everyone on mute. Would be great if you can mute your mic. It's not as it was the first time you make some virtual conference over the past years, unfortunately. However, so let's go in the presentation. The idea is just to have a brief overview of what we mean with sustainable finance. I would certainly need the night, because we have as many definitions as there are investors. I think nowadays everybody is a green investor, needs to integrate environmental, social, and governance, so the famous ESG principle in their investment decision. So I will just spend a few words. I think it's more important to go on the part 3. And as you are all very active on the climate issue, I will put more focus today on climate change and why it is important for investors, and actually what they can do to influence companies or avoid certain risks they might have in their investment portfolio. So I think that will bring more concrete example on how there is an interaction between investor and companies, and the kind of progress we see, and the kind of challenge we still have, of course, to be, I would say, net zero 2050. This is a buzzword before Glasgow. So let's go into the topic. Sustainable finance. So historically, sustainable finance exists for a couple of years. It was more an approach. Really, at the beginning, the origin come back in the US. You know, you have a lot of faith-based investor like church. They have a lot of money. They actually invest in market those monies. And they actually rapidly started to say, okay, we cannot invest in any sectors and any companies. So they really started to apply some exclusion and say, okay, some sectors like tobacco, gambling, those kind of activities does not match our values. And we want to actually invest in companies, at least which do not contravene the values. And there was also a big movement against weapons with peace and love movement against the Vietnam War in the US in the 60s, where there was a lot of push from civil society to exclude companies making some weapons. That's I would say some of the origin of those responsible investment approach, which were a little bit more on the ethical view, moral view. And nowadays, negative screening, so it's applying exclusion, eliminating some companies which are active in some sectors from the investment universe. So of course, nowadays, a big topic is on coal, and of course on fossil companies, where some investors start to apply those exclusions. So I would say those companies are excluded independently on how their governance or their transparency would be. So that's one of the approach. Another approach, which is also often done by investors, is they will give some ESG, so environmental, social, and governance ratings to companies. So they will look at how, typically on governance, the diversity, the remuneration of the board, of the CEO, those kind of criteria. On the environmental part, maybe the climate strategy, their environmental impact. On the social part, certainly some important indicators on employees, those kind of indicators. And they will come up with kind of scoring, ranking, like in school, give some grade to company. And usually what investors are doing is that they tend to compare companies in different sectors, so best in class. So we'll try to select in their investment the best company in terms of ESG in each sectors. This is a best in class approach, which also is quite historical, maybe not the most applied nowadays because it's quite restrictive. We tend to exclude a lot of companies in the investment universe. Then there is a lot of company investment strategy which goes with active ownership. I will really put a focus on this. It's often seen as a sustainable investment per se. I'm not so convinced. I believe active ownership should be applied to any strategy, any sustainable strategy. You do so as long as you invest in a company, you receive some rights, typically voting rights. If you are shareholders, you are co-owners of a company, then you can influence how a company behaves. So of course, if you are an investor in Nestlé, you will be very small, but still exercising those rights can really have a great impact. So I will put some focus on it. So yes, so sometimes you will see it's seen as a strategy per se. I think it should be applied to any kind of approach. And then more on the theme specific investment. So it's really looking typically making some investment in renewable energy. So selecting in the portfolio companies active in a certain sectors and really have some kind of theme specific or thematic investment. It's also an approach which is not really deployed currently. It's clear if you want to have a concentration in all companies in renewable energy, there is not that many candidates in listed equities, so it's always difficult to have a large universe, but still this is something which is applied. So Swiss Sustainable Finance, SSF, is making every year a survey of how many of this approach are applied. And so you will see the exclusion part, so the negative screening. What I was referring is one of the investment strategy which is often used by investor. You see there is a strong growth year after year from investors which are actually declaring they are using such strategy. I think there is effectively on the market that more and more investor needs to integrate that. There is a pressure from the civil society. There is a political pressure. There is the EU, the European Union also, which is making a big push on regulation, which actually push investors to more and more apply some sustainable investment strategy. The biggest one actually is the integration of ESG criteria. It's not by chance that the most apply a strategy. It's also the most difficult to verify. Usually some investor asset manager usually claims they make integration. That means they have information on ESG available, and the asset manager, the portfolio manager who will decide on buying such a company or such company, usually you will sometimes ask question on ESG or say, okay, in this sector, I think climate change is a big risk, so I will apply a climate, I will select company which have some science-based target or reduction target on their CO2. But it's often quite a black box, I would say. So it's quite difficult to verify. I don't know what Raphael is thinking, since he worked also in a big asset manager, which actually do some integration. It can be well done, but sometimes it's difficult to really verify. So for me, it's not by chance that this is one of the most applied strategy. And you see there is also the dialogue ESG. So it means that investors are actually exercising their voting rights or engaging dialogue with company. Again, it's one of the large portion of investors which claim being responsible investor with such strategy. Yeah, for me, it's very important to do it, but I wouldn't say it's a strategy per se. It should be applied to everyone. But here, it's not mutually exclusive. So it means you can, some investor can be categorized in several approach. It's not one or the other. So it just shows a little bit how it's working on the market. But you see also that the best-in-class approach, which I described before, or impact investing, yeah, that's a less used strategy. It's also, it has to do because it's more, it forces actually to be more restrictive on which company you can invest in your portfolio. So it's not the first choice by investors. So I'm not saying those making integration or only exclusion are making greenwashing, because I think it depends really on how they categorize the product they sell the investor. And I think there is big expectation gap between the public, yourself. Certainly if you come to this conference, you expect that, okay, I'm talking about sustainable investment, so everybody, I will speak about green investment. It's not only about green. Typically the debate on Tesla is it a good ESG ratings or not? Electrical vehicle, yes, I think they are part of the solution. But if you look a little bit more on the governance practice of this company, some investor will say, no, it cannot enter in my portfolio because the governance is too much of risk. The company depends too much on one person. Other will say, no, my focus is more on having electrical vehicles, support the transition, so I need Tesla in my portfolio. Depends really on the approach. So transparency is key. When you look at sustainable investment fund, typically, if you want to be an investor and you go to a bank, you ask some green investment. The bank has to explain that correctly. So I think Greenpeace made some mystery shopping at banks, and actually I think there is a gap in the training of those people. Anyway, that's a little bit the panorama. I don't go in details with the regulation which is evolving, because yes, those definitions are not set in stone. There is evolution, and I think here EU is also trying to push on regulation. Just a few words about Ethos, because I think it's important to understand also the background from where we come when we actually engage dialogue with company and try to push for more responsibility among companies. We were founded by two pension funds, Swiss pension fund, Geneva-based pension fund, back in 1997, with the goal actually to propose responsible investment. So at the beginning, it was more about excluding certain sector. One of the founder of Ethos was la CIA, la Caisse de Pension. C'est pas la CIA, it's not the CIA, US CIA, it's the pension fund of the state of Geneva, which has now become CPEG. And this is a public pension fund managing the retirement of the state employees, les fonctionnaires publics. And you know, in a pension fund, the board of trustees has a lot of power, and the board of trustees or the board of foundation is composed of both representative of employees and representative of employers. So it's often a lot of debate. And in Geneva, the pension fund, actually the part on employee was quite on the left, quite like unions being represented. And the part on the employer, they were also not that right wing because it's a political framework. The government is more on the left, and typically at that back there, the board of trustee of la CPEG was quite on the left. So for them, investing in equity in listed company was too much capitalistic. They were really investing the asset in real estate and in fixed income, but going into listed equity was something a little bit difficult for them. So that's how it came with the idea to actually invest with sustainability criteria and actually start to also trying to influence company by exercising the voting rights at the general meeting. So that's how it started in '97, and the Ethos Foundation was created with two very important goals. The goal of the foundation is to promote sustainable investment and to promote a stable and prosperous socioeconomic environment. So that's really set in our charter, and that's why Ethos is fully dedicated to sustainable investment. We cannot start offering other products because it's really in our charter. And nowadays, after almost 25 years, we have more than 230 members. These members, so mostly pension fund or foundation, they manage more than 300 billion of assets. This is about 1/4 of the second pillar in Switzerland. So of course, they do not delegate the asset management. We don't manage this asset ourselves at Ethos. We manage a very, very small part. But what most of those members are doing is actually working with us to engage dialogue and actually represent them to the general meeting. And why actually it's very important. This is a small graphic which shows actually the evolution in the capital of large listed companies. So you all know Nestlé. You can be critical, so that's not the point here. What is interesting, if you look at the evolution of who are the shareholder of Nestlé, you can see that nowadays 81% of the shareholder of Nestlé are institutional investor. So institutional investor is typically pension fund, asset manager, insurance, sovereign funds. And private shareholders, so maybe your grandfather or grandmother usually always had some Nestlé shares. That was part really of the culture, of the Swiss culture, to hold shares of Nestlé and to go to the general meeting. They actually are only 19%. And every year it's going down. So who is controlling companies such as Nestlé is really institutional investor. And you see most of them are actually based in the US. One of the largest shareholder of Nestlé is BlackRock, which is one of the largest asset manager worldwide. But we still have a lot of Swiss-based investor in Nestlé. That's still good, but it's decreasing every year. And actually, it's very important because if you look at how an institutional investor actually has some fiduciary duties. If yourself as a private person, you buy shares of Nestle, certainly you won't, because let's say you buy Tesla share. If you want to vote at the general meeting, you can decide to vote for or against Elon Musk, or you do what you want. You don't have to give account to anyone. Whereas if you are an institutional investor, you manage the asset of others. So you have a fiduciary duties actually to exercise those rights in a transparent manner. So that's very important. And also institutional shareholder, unfortunately, sometimes they adopt what we call passive strategy. So they tend to copy a market, an index. If you all know in Switzerland, the Swiss market index, that's the market of the 20 largest listed company. So if Nestle makes 20% of the index, you will hold 20% of Nestle. Your portfolio will have 20% of Nestle shares. So you really copy paste the index. That's really I think the reason mainly is that you prefer to be wrong with all the market than to be right alone and saying, okay, I exclude Nestle, because of course if Nestle go up, then all the market goes up. If Nestle goes down, all the market goes down. So you prefer being with the other. You are a little bit les moutons, that's clear. And you see this graphic shows really the portion of investment fund in the US which are passive, and it's increasing every year still. So the problem with this, if you have such strategy to be very passive, you cannot decide to sell a company because you are not happy. You're prisoner with the company. So that's why it's very important to be actually an active owner and to discuss actually and vote as the general meeting of those companies. So no exit strategy. So you have it actually to exercise your voting rights. So sustainability for Ethos, as I said, there are many definitions. Here we've just summarized our 8 principles, what we believe, what is sustainable investment for us. So of course there is part of exclusion. We believe it's very important to exclude some sectors which we believe are incompatible with some of our values, or for which we believe there is too much financial risk. Typically, if we nowadays exclude companies active in coal extraction or thermal coal, it's of course the environmental impact, but it's also because it's a financial risk. The same I would say for non-conventional fossil, which we believe are a financial risk. Then we have all the exclusion about major controversies. And I think one important principle for us is to integrate climate change in our investment policy. I will come back to this point later. So you have all these principles, I would say 2 to 5, which are really when you decide on which company you want to have in your portfolio. You have to really apply quite a systematic environmental, social, and governance analysis, and go in details in this analysis. That's what Raphael is doing the whole day, hopefully. And many other projects, but this is a very important task. And then principles 6 to 8 are also once you have selected the company you want to have in your portfolio, to exercise your voting rights. So that really applies typically when you buy equities, listed equities, or private equity as well. If you go in private equity, it's even more important to be an active owner because you have a bigger voice there. So I make the focus now on climate change because I think you're very interested in this question, and it's a hot topic. I don't like this jeu de mots, but yeah, it's of course something very important nowadays on most of the investors' agenda. And finally, why it's nowadays so important. As I said, institutional investors, they manage the asset of others, and as such, they have a fiduciary duties also in the Swiss law. So there is still some debate how far it's the role of an asset owner to take that into consideration. There is often a debate between typically for a pension fund, some say that if you exclude the whole fossil industry and during 1 or 2 years the fossil are going up, it's not this year, typically the fossil industry is quite going up because the price is going up of oil. So the share price of oil industry are increasing. So if you have excluded this sector, potentially your return will be lower than the market. So some pension funds say, my fiduciary duty could be compromised if I don't take this risk, if I'm not investing there. But the legal opinion of Niederkraft here clearly says that pension funds also have to consider the long-term risk. And if you look at the long-term risk of fossil industry, then it becomes clear that certainly you should act on this sector. There is also, I think, since 2015 and the Paris Agreement, a big move among investors, also a big move among regulators, not in Switzerland, but in other countries at least. Switzerland tried at least, but anyway. But one of the points which is important, in addition to the 1.5 limitation of the climate as a warming, is also to make financial flow, consistent with the pathway toward low greenhouse gas emission. And that means really investors have to take action. I will come back to it. But this point is coming now also into different legislation in different countries. So that's a big push for investors to really start taking climate change seriously into consideration when making investment decisions. And then, of course, there is some legal risk. And we had a big case this year with Shell. Actually, a court in Netherlands actually give right to some NGOs which attacked Shell on not doing enough on the reduction targets. So it becomes actually a low risk not for companies not to act on climate change, and could become also a risk for pension funds because their goal is to pay retirement. But if they invest too much in fossil and so on, and in 30 years they're losing value, then they certainly face some legal risk. And of course, there is this big question of stranded asset. I'm sure you're all familiar with it, but that's also to do with the transition risk. If we now move and we really want to fight climate change, that means that we will really have to go out of fossil. We cannot afford going more with fossil energy. And I think legislation is going. There is a lot of push that by 2013, a lot of countries, thermal motor from company will be forbidden. That will mean that there will be a lot of oil in the market that will not be usable. And there are a lot of actually reserves which are on the balance sheet of a lot of oil companies. When you dig and you search for oil, when you find oil, big value. Was a big value actually, because it was all potentially things you can extract. So there is some valuation model, discounted cash flow for those of you which are in economics, so you're familiar. So you make a valuation of the potential return that this oil will bring to you. And you have to recognize that in your balance sheet as an asset. But now, if we want to be 1.5 degree, it means this oil, which was discovered, has to stay on the ground. So that's all the risks that those assets that you have recognized. You were very happy, I found oil, super. But nowadays, this oil potentially could have no value because you won't be able to extract it. So unfortunately, still oil and gas companies are still drilling, are still looking for oil, because I think they still feel that the time needed to regulate that, and yeah, it takes some time. But when it will change, for me, it's the same as when Kodak, maybe you're too young to know Kodak, which was making before the numerical pictures, actually. They didn't see the disruption come. That their, I don't know how to call that in English, les pellicule photo would disappear. It's like making a video, or when the blockbusters, which was renting videos, actually all the stores disappeared because with the technological evolution. So the same will happen with oil. I think everybody agree with it. The only question is when, and I think investors are a little bit afraid to exclude too quickly, because those companies will stay in the index and will still have some positive, negative, and evolution. So yeah, there is still some not a sense of urgency behind that. But at one point, this asset will disappear. So how we look at this at Ethos on the climate strategy, maybe that's for more the technical person of view, the more environmental engineer, certainly there is. So of course, it's about measuring for what we expect from companies. It's that they measure the different source of CO2 emission. So Greenhouse Gas Protocol makes this categorization, scope 1, that the direct emission, the one which comes from your factories when you do something, or so that's a direct emission of a company. Scope 2 is typically the emission you acquire from from electricity, from utilities, so that's the electricity you need. And scope 3, that's the black box. That's where all the indirect emissions are coming. So typically supply chain or when for the use of the product. So typically on we were talking about fossil fuel. If you look only at scope 1 and 2, it's not that big. The biggest part of the GHG emission of a fossil industry or an automaker is the use of the product. When you burn the oil, that's where the emissions are coming. And that's a huge part of the emission. So Exxon now claims to be neutral on scope 1 and 2, but never address scope 3. And that's where actually they need to address the issue. Very important for us is to have also verification of what is published by company, because it's still, we have the feeling we're not where we should be with the quality of the data which are provided by company. And very important for an investor now is to push and to have company which set themselves target. So net zero, of course, is an important ambition, but more important for us is to have a short-term target and a pathway and measures actually to reach the target. I put here the reference to the Science-Based Targets Initiative. You will have all the slide afterward. This is an initiative which actually verifies that the reduction target of the companies are aligned with 1.5 degree. So it's I think an important work they're doing. Another point is the alignment of CapEx. CapEx is all the investment made by a company. Typically nowadays, when we talk about climate change, was not the case 5 years ago. But I think when a company decides to acquire another company or decide to acquire or invest in a new product, it has to verify if this new technology, this new product, this new company is aligned with the 1.5 degree. Because otherwise, that does not make sense. And that's typically, I think, when we look at the Paris Agreement, what they say about aligning financial flow to the Paris Accord. For me, as an investor, there is two ways. So I'm going a little bit in the debate of divest or engage, because I was quite critical to the oil and gas company. So if you have listened to me until now, you say, so it's easy, you did divest from all fossil industry. It's not that easy. I think there is still some potentialities that some of those companies can also play a role in the transition. And the problem, if you divest directly from the company in the market, somebody else will actually purchase the company. So the emission, actually, if you sell your shares of Exxon or whatever, the emissions they produce won't disappear. So one thing which is, I think, important is to start first before eliminating all the company with high CO2 emission. I think more important is try, as you are a co-owner of a company. If you start your own company now, you have all your capital in a company. You can influence what you want. You can decide. here, of course, in listed company, you are a very small shareholder, but still, as a share owner, you can decide on who is the board of director, who is what decisions they are making. So that's why it's very important as co-owner of company actually to ask the board of directors to realign the capex, so the capital expenditure, toward the 1.5. Of course, then if they refuse and you cannot actually manage to make them change, then yes, let's divest. But I think active ownership, that the point is something which can be useful. So here I just put a definition. It's really shareholders trying to influence company management to change their business. I'm reading the sentence, it's easier. Anyway, I think it's good definition. So yeah, really trying to influence the management toward more sustainability. So you can have, there is several ways to do it. So I was talking about proxy voting at the general meeting, because at the end of the day, you are as a shareholder deciding on who is the board. So that's very important. Engagement, dialoguing. So it's important typically if you vote against a point at the general meeting, very important to explain and disclose why. So then you help companies to potentially making progress. And then one very important tool, I will come back on it, is shareholder resolution. It's like the droit d'initiative and the initiative in a political issue. So usually at the general meeting, it's a board of directors, so a conseil d'administration, which makes proposition to shareholders, but shareholders actually have the right to make at the general meeting some proposition. And that has a big impact. That typically what we have at annual general meetings, so the classical resolution on voting on the accounts, compensation, electing the board of directors, electing the auditors, and I put again this shareholder resolution here. So here you see on usually the resolution of the board of directors are really more on the governance, how the company is governed, not really on the environmental part or social part. However, more and more investors now are trying to integrating in their voting guidelines that if the company is actually lagging in terms of sustainability, and they still can exercise their voting right and vote against a board member, typically the chairman. So it's a new trend, and I think it's a good trend. Here I give an example. I like this slide. I don't know if you know Carbon Tracker. It's a very UK-based NGO, which actually was one of the first associations which really speak about stranded asset back in 2007 or 8. Actually, they make a ranking of the fossil industry. And here you see the least worst, les moins pires. So let's say, okay, the best. Then in yellow, the companies in terms of climate alignment. It's a really comparison of company emission targets. You see the yellow one, which are having some commitment, but not really detailed plan. And you see the red, so the bad guys, if I can say so, which are really companies which are lagging in terms of strategy. And if you look what happened at the general meeting this year, actually at Exxon, the last one here, there was what we call a proxy fight. So I will come back on this example because it's I think something very new and very important what happened at the general meeting of Exxon. There was shareholder resolution imposing new reduction target at Chevron, which actually gained support, and also a shareholder resolution on reduction target at ConocoPhillips, the AGM of May of this year. So I come to Exxon because, again, Exxon, as you see in the ranking, and I think it's well known for being not really climate aware. Typically, I think the scientists first talk about climate change back in the 80s. They even make the projection of the emission and were very precise. If you look at what they were projected in the 80s, you come up very close to what we have today. So they knew. So it's even worse that they're not doing anything. It's denying what's happening with scientific knowledge they had. So anyway, what happened is that CalSTRS, which is one very important pension fund in the US, and an activist fund, Engine Number One, a very small fund actually, decided to make a counter proposition during the general meeting. Usually at the general meeting, the board makes a proposition for their candidates. But here, the shareholder decide, okay, no, we want to elect 4 other members. In addition, or not in addition, but against some of the members of the board of Exxon. So it was quite a shock, I think, for Exxon. There is often proxy fight for financial reason. When an activist fund is not happy with the financial performance, then it often attack companies to take control of the board and make their own strategy. But here it was really on climate. But typically, I think investors here are convinced that climate and financial are going together now at those companies. And rapidly, some shareholders actually supported what CalSTRS and Engine One was making. They create a group, which I like the name CURE. It's a Coalition United for a Responsible Exxon. Cure Exxon somehow, because they need to. 2.4 trillion of assets which gather to support these candidates. So that's the 2,400 billion of assets, so quite an amount. And at the end, 3 of the 4 candidates of the activists from the CURE coalition actually were elected to Exxon board against the will of the board of directors. And that's really the first time that such an event happened. So that means really, I think shareholders now, before divesting, try to influence really at the heart of the decision making of a company. And that gives me hope, because behind this, for years, there was some push from some shareholders which were convinced, but often the BlackRock and so were voting against such a progressive proposal by shareholders. Now it's changing. And that's, I think, a good demonstration. And I think here the FT is a turning point for big oil when there is such a revolution. That's a revolution in the boardroom. The shareholder proposal, here you have the text which was proposed actually by Follow This. Follow This, which is a US NGO. I think there is a link to this NGO. They make a wonderful job. You can also have a look at them. They made this proposition in the US at Chevron, which actually gained support of a majority of vote of the shareholders. So here, when they make such a stockholder or shareholder proposition, what is important to say is that in the US, such shareholder resolution are non-binding. So Chevron could say, no, I don't really care. But if they don't care and don't do something after such a support, certainly the year after, what will happen is that the Exxon case will happen again, and shareholder will start to oppose a member of the board of Chevron. So I think they will tend to move. So here, this is the 3 proposition from Follow This. Follow This, this is the name, which actually gained support this year at ConocoPhillips, Phillips 66, Chevron. So you see, there is this year something is happening. I think at general meetings, and investors are really pushing something. Another trend which I think is very important is say on climate. So as I said, it's great. Maybe you want to open the question now. Let's go quickly.
2-3 minutes. Yeah, 2-3 minutes.
Yeah, I think I finished with this say on climate, because I know you will already have questions on the net zero, greenwashing, etc. I agree. If we just have the net zero 2050, the CEO of a company won't be there to judge, and it's easy to say I will be net zero if he leaves the day after. But as shareholders, we believe it's very important that companies which commit, that they set short-term target and clear measure. So that's why we are asking companies to submit at the general meeting their sustainability, not only sustainability, but their climate change strategy. And to publish every year an annual progress report where they will show how they reduce their emission in accordance with their commitment. If they want to be net zero 2050, of course, they have to have a strategy, they have to have a roadmap, they have to have a plan. You cannot just say, I will be net zero without doing nothing. So that's why we want to push companies actually to submit such proposition at general meetings. I listed some of the advantages, but one of the most important, I think, is that then if it's submitted to shareholders, then the board of directors, so the highest governing body in the company, has to be responsible for it. And then they will push that the management respect their engagement. So for me, it's very important. So in Switzerland, we targeted at Ethos because we are actually responsible for engaging dialogue with these two companies, Holcim and Nestlé. Both companies actually are the largest CO2 emitters. They represent almost 2/3 of the direct and indirect GHG emissions. So we had the visit here of Extinction Rebellion. We say, how can Ethos be a shareholder of Holcim and Nestlé, the largest polluter in the world? Say yes, that's effectively a very good question. We believe that we need to be shareholder actually to influence them, because if we start excluding them, then we also have to exclude many other companies making food and beverage, many other companies doing building materials. And I think it would be also hypocrite, not honest from pension fund to say, okay, I exclude Holcim because they emit too much CO2, but then in my real estate portfolio, I use cement to construct my real estate. Of course, they should rethink how they build. No question on this. But I think it's very important just to make them actually take concrete action to change. And it's not by excluding them that we cannot achieve that. I'm convinced that we need to push them. But to push them, it's a lot of work, because we sent 2 letters to both chairmen, to Mr. S, the chairman of Holcim, and to Mr. Bulke, the chairman of Nestlé, to tell them, okay, prepare a report how you, because both want to be net zero 2050. So they have ambition. Good, but the journey is not that clear. So we ask both companies to actually publish their strategy and to submit their strategy to a shareholder vote. Interesting that Holcim chairman was really positive and said, yeah, I will submit that to my board. I think it's a good idea. We want to do something. We're convinced we have to move. Then Nestlé chairman was a little bit more hesitant, said, okay, let's wait, there will be a new law. We do enough. We don't need to add something to the general meeting. It's useless. Okay. So with such an answer, we decided to submit a proposition. So it goes quite far. We prepared a change in the article of association of Nestlé to say, okay, Nestlé has to prepare every year a progress report on its climate strategy and submit this report to a consultative vote of shareholder at the general meeting. It's not very easy to put such a proposition at Nestlé. You need 5 million shares. So we don't have 5 million shares, because if 5 million shares of Nestlé is 500 million of assets. So alone, we cannot do this. So in very quickly, actually, we could have 7 pension funds, which actually agreed to co-file such resolution with us. So we were ready actually to any answer. But end of February, Holcim said, the chairman confirmed, yes, I think it's a very good idea. However, we're not ready at the 2021 meeting. We have not prepared the report you are asking. So we cannot submit anything this year. Let us 1 year and we submit our report at the 2022 general meeting. That was a very good compromise. We approved that, and we decided, yes, it's a good idea. We didn't need actually to submit our proposition at the general meeting. Nestlé, on the contrary, said no. I think it's useless. So we actually, on the 28th of February, sent our letter with a proposition to change the article of association. A few minutes after I sent the email, I received a call from the board secretary. Cannot we discuss? So yeah, we have discussed for 2 months. We have left you 2 months. You say you don't want. So now let's discuss this at the general meeting. Can we find a compromise? So we say, that was on Friday. So said, okay, discuss on your side. We discuss on Monday. Told them we are open to remove our resolution. If you do something, yes, you have the weekend to make us a counter proposition. So they agreed actually to submit their roadmap toward net zero to shareholder vote, which is a good beginning, but more important for us is a progress report. So yeah, I think it's moving. I think it was a good victory for us to already obtain this right. No, it does not mean everything is solved. On the contrary, it's the beginning of the journey. But now we have, at least as shareholder, a tool to verify and to increase pressure on companies. Voila. Sorry, I was a little bit too long, but good question.
Thank you for these interesting examples. Don't know if you have a conclusion.
Yeah, my conclusion is here. Yeah. The journey is still very long, and we need a lot of engagement. But I think it's not black or white, exclude, engage. It's a mix of both. If you want to achieve that, I think it's very important to use your shareholder right. If you do it seriously, and for me, this example shows how all the process is. Sending a letter is good, but you need to follow. You need to go to really to be ready to fight somehow with those companies.
Okay. Thanks a lot for the presentation. Now we have some minutes for some questions. So if there are some people who wants to ask a question, you can unmute and ask a question now. Otherwise, I don't know if Miklos, I don't know if you have a question.
Okay, thank you. So I have a number of questions, but I'll just start with one. So first of all, there's an argument going around that ESG really is not about the sustainable practices, but much more about just purely risk management. And that having an ESG certified company is really just about having a company that will be perceived well. How do you feel about that?
I'm sorry, the beginning was a little bit, the speaker, I didn't get the beginning of it. No, mais attends, je vais prendre. Can you just repeat the beginning about risk management?
Mais c'est bon, là, on entend maintenant.
On entend? Bon, c'est là? C'est sorti de truc, je crois.
Okay, can you hear me properly?
Yeah, sorry, I had a problem, sorry.
Okay, so thank you very much for your very interesting presentation. And I have a number of questions, but so my question is about ESG as a risk management tool, because if you look at how ESG is handled in Europe, it's all about climate change. If you look at how ESG is handled in the States, it's all about diversity. So really every country seems to do what they care about most. And it seems to me like ESG in many contexts is taken purely as a risk management tool in terms of just PR risks, so that the company can say, well, yeah, we are responsible in the widest sense. But this really being about protecting investors, first of all, before actually improving the world.
Yeah, but I think those two pathways can somehow work together. But I agree with you. I think it's and at the basis of responsible investment, it's about also lowering our investment risk. And I think those companies with better ESG ratings per se usually also have a stronger, have a better financial quality. There is a lot of correlation there. So yeah. But of course, if you manage your risk properly, and if the environmental risk, if you take a mining companies, of course, one of the higher risk is the environmental impact when you have an accident there. So if you minimize this risk, you also minimize the potential impact on the environment. So that's where I would say that managing those ESG risks properly should also have a positive impact somehow. So I don't see any contradiction between both. However, of course, we are still investing in capital market, and investor and shareholders expect some financial return. So, but it speaks better to tell them, yeah, now you need to manage risk properly, because bankers typically know this very well, or insurance company. Typically, if you take nuclear energy, it's a good example, because you know, a nuclear plant cannot be reinsured. It's too much of risk. They cannot price the risk of a nuclear. So if you were listening to reinsurers, then you wouldn't go in the nuclear. So yeah, I think it's, for me, I don't see any contradiction. Now I think with EU taxonomy, and you're right, depend on countries, but I think climate change, you are a little bit rough, because in the US, as you see with Exxon and so on, climate change is also on the agenda, because I think most of institutional investors there also recognize the financial risk of climate change. So I think on climate change, I still think it's quite, yeah, Europe is going very fast in terms of regulation. And with the taxonomy, actually, we are pushing also some redirecting the financial flow toward solution provider. And with this framework, we will also, yeah, ease the life and of those companies who want to develop new technology, wants really to be part of the solution. They will find more easily investments from shareholders, because they will have to report if they want to be green with the SFDR, the new regulation. If they want to still be qualified as a green, they will have to demonstrate that they do invest in companies which are actually classified as green by the EU taxonomy. So we can debate on the taxonomy. There is, I think, also EU is debating whether they should put nuclear. France wants to push nuclear in the taxonomy. Germany wants to push natural gas in the taxonomy. So it has a lot to do with political strategy. But still, those framework will really redirect investment toward those companies which are providing solutions. And that will automatically increase the demand on such stocks. And we already see some kind of those companies making some solution are actually outperforming on the market. So it's not only about ESG managing risk, it's also about creating opportunities. A long answer, sorry.
Other questions? Otherwise,
You had a lot of questions.
Or
go ahead. I'll ask some more questions if there's some more time at the end.
If
they are afraid of my answers.
Other question? I have maybe a question for you. We've seen that the best in class and impact investing are the investments with the less volume of investment, but they have a real social or an environmental impact. So why are the reasons for this, in your opinion, and what are the barriers that we need to cross?
Yeah, I think it also has to do with the slide on page, if you look page with a passive investment, because if you best in class is typically an active investment strategy. When you do best in class, you really are very far from it. You are not copying the index per se. So when you look at this trend of the increase of passive investors, of course, this is totally incompatible with best in class. So unless you start using, there is more and more, I would say, sustainability indices. However, these indices are not so best in class. There is one, I think, from MSCI ESG Leaders. It's quite best in class and it's quite restrictive, but it's not the most used, commonly used. So this trend of increasing passive investment by institutional investor, if you look at a pension fund has two jobs: managing assets and being an insurance company. They really have to pay the retirement. And of course, those people are very conservative. I must say, I meet a lot of them, and they are quite afraid if I exclude too much, or if I go in the best in class, my performance could be very different from the one of the index. Is that compatible with my fiduciary? They are asking the question. I'm convinced, yes. It it is very compatible. But of course, if you have a best-in-class approach, you have what we call a tracking error compared to the index. And yeah, the tracking error actually is not that well seen. And also, I understand some of this investor, because when you have an active investment strategy, independently of ESG or not, generally, if you are an active manager, usually the fees are quite more expensive as what you pay for replicating an index. I mean, you don't have to do a lot of research to copy an index. You look at how the weighting. It's not easy really to track that. I'm not saying it's an easy job, but just to decide I put 20% of Nestlé in my fund because the index has 20, that does not cost a lot. Active management costs more. And if you pay more for an investment strategy, you expect more return. That's what we call alpha. And yeah, not always active investment manager can beat the index. So why an investor will say I will pay more fees and not beat the index? So that could be a reason why. And of course, in terms of sustainable investment strategy, yeah, it's surpassed by this integration and the other categories. But if you look best in class, there is still an increase. Huh? So it's also good news. But of course, a big increase comes with those strategies which have less impact on your tracking error. Yeah. Integration and engagement per se, you can do it without any tracking error. So it's a little bit statistical and technical. Sorry for the tracking of terms. That's more
non-financial.
Yeah.
Do you have another question in the online audience?
I think, Miklos, you can go ahead.
Okay, thank you very much. My next question is actually just about what you were talking about. So you were talking about how institutional investments make about 80% of Nestlé's investments. So I was wondering, does that mean that because there are not these active managers that are putting in money or withdrawing money from these funds and actually judging the quality of a company, that the share price of companies is starting to become slightly less efficient just because you don't have that level of feedback? And that meaning that maybe it would increasingly, if this trend continues, that more and more investments are made by passive investors, that there are actually openings to beat the market a little bit more easily because of market inefficiencies created by just these zombies basically that are just tracking the index.
Yeah, excellent question. I think there is a lot of research on it actually, and the big issue, if you look at the three big asset managers which are passive, Vanguard, State Street, and BlackRock, they all make about 15 to 20% of those capital, and it's almost an oligopoly because they are universal owner, and actually they can decide if they own 20% of Airbus, 20% of Boeing. Actually, they could. Yeah, they have some diverging interest. But what you said about activists is also something I see, but I see it more on the mid and small cap market because, of course, if there is an efficiency in the market, then of course activist funds like the Elliott, the one we'll see some investment opportunities. And I think the more the investment, the passive are more. Passive investor you have, and the consequence of being a passive investor is also you have a lot of equities in your portfolio. So that creates opportunities for very well organized investor. Usually an activist has 10 companies in its portfolio, and before taking an investment, he makes such an investment case, and he comes at the AGM to take control of the board, and he has a wonderful presentation. Usually it's quite short-term strategy. Often we link to selling one of the division, making a share buyback. It's not science rockets. Often that's exactly what Mr. Loeb. So one investment fund actually took 1% of Nestlé and could decide almost on all the strategy. And the 20 billion share buyback, it's been 3 years and making 20 billion share buyback by selling some of the brand and so on. Was all directed by one shareholder who owned 1%. why the other shareholders are not moving? It's difficult to be as well informed when you have 4,000 companies in your portfolio. How you can follow that? So you tend to delegate, and then usually those activists are quite well prepared. So it's quite a long debate. Not really a debate, but it's a difficult question you are asking. But I think I quite to agree with you that those passive investors tend to make the market quite inefficient. I don't know if I bring some additional points, not really an answer, but I bring some point which I believe goes in the same direction as you are mentioning. Maybe not, but.
No, thank you very much. This is very fascinating, and I'll open the floor to other questions, but thank you very much.
You're working in studying finance or working in finance yourself, no? More familiar?
No, I just started an MBA at the University of St. Gallen.
Okay.
But I'm a pianist, and I'm seeking to do a career change to climate change. So this is very interesting.
Yeah.
Thanks. Maybe one last question. I have one, but if anybody else wants to ask a question. No. So my question would be on transparency. I think it's the big one of the main themes of your presentation as well, and it's one of the fields where I think we have to make a lot of progress. We have a lack of regulation, obviously, in Switzerland as well. But in a perfect world, we would have all the ratings of banks, all the ratings of companies, etc., available online or accessible to the general public. So, but what do we need to do to have more transparency, in your opinion? Is it just regulation, or do we have other actions?
No, regulation is key. But if you look at what happened with financial statement, it took 200 years to come up to an international financial standard like IFRS, starting from having a financial statement, and so we don't have this time, of course. But I mean, it's a huge work. So of course, regulator has to make the pace increase and also regulate that, because as a company, I think there is three sources of data that investors are gathering. So of course, corporate disclosure. So the companies disclose their sustainability report, very important data. Often they are not audited, and often they tend not to disclose what would not really be in their advantages if it's not regulated. That's why it's very important to have a second source of data. It's typically the NGO opinion or news flow or all the controversies, what you're screening also a lot, which is very important, because then you can bring the nice paper and the nice sustainability report of the company with what the external view are. Then the third is also estimated data, like the pathway of a company. So there is some estimated pathway by international agency, energy agency. The JEC also makes their pathway toward how we need to reduce CO2 for each sectors. And then you can compare effectively companies, their own trajectory to the trajectories they should follow. So it's very important to have all those sources. And on the corporate side, I think we need absolutely to regulate, to ask also auditing of those reports. In Switzerland, the good news, so the bad news was that, I think, was my personal opinion, that not it was also Ethos opinion, but we reviewed the responsible business initiative in November. I think it would have been a great opportunity for Switzerland to have a modern law on the due diligence on human rights and environmental impact. So it was refused by the canton, not by the people. But the counter proposition, of course, goes far less far. But at least there is the obligation for companies to publish a sustainability report. However, they don't really say if the report has to follow a standard and if it has to be audited. But the good news is that they say in the law that shareholder will have to vote on this sustainability report. And that's why at Ethos, as of next year, we will already define what we expect in those reports. And typically, we want those reports to follow a standard and to be audited and to have ambitious, to address the materiality issues. And if it's not, then we will refuse at the AGM the report. So normally we will vote on those reports for the first time in 2024, but we will already publish our guidelines with this requirement as of next year. So it's a way to engage with companies. Say, okay, you will submit your sustainability report. These are the criteria. Ethos, as such, will apply. We also hope to influence other investors with their voting guidelines. So if there is some traction, then we can certainly maybe push. But self-regulation, I think the stock exchange should also have a listing requirement. That should be a game changer. So we are pushing also their stock exchange to do something.
And we will probably, as you say, need a lot of change also in politics, because I don't know if you heard about it, but last parliamentary session, there was, for example, a motion to align the pension funds with climate goals proposed by a green liberal. I don't know if you've seen it, but it was refused by the parliament, saying that the measures already proposed and were enough, and that we needed voluntary measures instead of this. But so we see. I mean, when I saw that, I thought we also really need a change in politics and on regulations as well.
Yeah.
Great. So thank you very, very much, Vincent Kaufmann, for this amazing presentation. We will publish this video on YouTube as well, and we hope to see you also in future conferences that we will organize still on sustainable finance, because there's a lot to do. There's a lot of experts in this field. There's a lot of great actors doing a lot of things in sustainable finance. So we'll hope to see you there. And thank you very, very much.
Thank you for your engagement also on this issue. It's very important that what you're doing at the association. So congrats. Thank you.
Thanks a lot.
Thanks.
Bye,
Have a
everybody.
good evening.
Have a good evening.